and New England Hospice for inviting us to speak to you. Yes, on Earth Day. How auspicious is that? It's really wonderful to be here. I'm Judith Lorai, and I'm the co-founder and on the board of Green Burial Massachusetts. And I'll be presenting with another Green Burial Mass volunteer, Elizabeth, and she'll introduce herself in a few minutes and tell you a little bit about her. So I just want to start by saying that Green Burial Massachusetts, you may or may not have heard of us. We've been working for over 10 years to educate and advocate on behalf of green burial options for Massachusetts residents. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, a statewide organization run by volunteers. And if any of you who volunteer yourself for any organization, you know it's a lot of work. But if you're passionate about it, it's also fun. We educate by providing presentations like this at libraries, professional associations, senior centers, religious organizations. We also provide consultation to cities and towns in Massachusetts to help them figure out how to incorporate green burial into their existing cemeteries. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, tell you a little bit more about our work there. And we're tied into a local and national network of people working on natural death care issues. And so we have lots of great colleagues out there, and some of them are on the call tonight. Maybe when we get to the Q&A, they can also, help us with providing information. A few years ago, we founded Green Burial Cemetery Incorporated, and in anticipation of creating a conservation cemetery in Massachusetts. And we'll also talk a little bit about that later in the presentation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a volunteer with Green Burial Massachusetts, and I'm also a life cycle celebrant. So we'll be covering a lot of ground tonight, but we also have time for questions at the end, as Jessica and Judith already mentioned. And so as you can see on your screen, things we're going to go over is what does green burial look like? Why green burial? Why might someone choose to that option for interment? What it is, the legality of it, the types of green burial cemeteries, our own project, the Valley Conservation Cemetery. We'll also have some resources outside of Green Burial Massachusetts that we'll cover as well that people might be interested in. And then we'll follow up with a Q&A. So to begin, these two pictures kind of show you the spectrum of burial. And before I begin, I just was reminded that I just want to put a little disclaimer out there. There will be images of burial shrouds, and just so people are aware that that is going to be in our imagery. Nothing too sensitive, but just want to keep everybody informed. So on the left, yes, so I'm going to make sure that so on the left is the conventional burial. And this was taken right around Mother's Day, which is one of the most visited times of cemeteries are visited. So you can see all the flowers and the traditional headstones. And then to the right is Green Springs Natural Cemetery Preserve in Newfield, New York. And that's a cemetery where there is no stone. If there is, it's probably a field stone that's flat, and there's just that burial mound. And one of the main differences here is you'll see that in the back of the conventional cemetery picture, all of that soil back there is what's come out of the ground, versus on the right with the conservation cemetery and the green cemetery, that mound is right there. And after time of rain, it will sink back down. So that just kind of shows you the different types. So when we refer to a cemetery as conventional, this is what most people envision when we think of a cemetery, the more traditional way of burial, one that has been doing for hundreds of years in this country. And versus on the right, which is the green burial. And so that kind of covers the spectrum that we're going to be showing you today. So why might someone choose green burial? Well, there's a lot of reasons. There's the connection to nature. There's the environmental impact of conventional burial versus green burial. There's the ability to personalize the ceremony. There could be religious or cultural reasons behind that, personal reasons, cost, or a mix of all of the above. If you're an environmentalist your whole life, you might want to have a green burial because it'll be consistent with your values. Some religions like Judaism, Islam, and other nature-based religions already kind of conduct aspects of a green burial. And it also may align with people's personal philosophies. It's a kind of a DIY. It can be. It's people who have a DIY sense gravitate towards green burial. So that's another reason. In Massachusetts, as in most states, it is legal. And with the proper paperwork, the city or town, people can, in Massachusetts, they technically do not need a funeral director. So a green burial kind of fits in with folks who might be wanting to be more hands-on with the interment of their loved ones. Green burial can be less expensive. It's not always less expensive. It depends on the cemetery the person's being buried in and the circumstances around that. But in some small towns that have hybrid cemeteries, and we'll get into what that means later, you can find a plot for $500 or less. But there's also, you can save money with a prep that is not necessary in natural burial that is in conventional burial. Another reason is ritual. We have ceremonies for everything. It's woven into the fabric of our lives. We have showers when a baby is born, we have weddings, we have graduations, and so there is a need for ritual when it comes to the end of life as well. And with green burial, that ritual can really be tailored to the person who has passed away. And it can have a lot of deep connection and involvement for the burial. So right here at Ramsey Creek, part of, there is no big equipment lowering the coffin into the ground. It's actually the family members. So there is a more personal connection that you can find. It can be seen as a final act of love. I've heard from people who have chosen green burial for their loved ones, and that there's a bigger catharsis they felt with going through that process in a more hands-on way than perhaps with the conventional burial. Doesn't mean that there is not catharsis with a traditional burial, but when you have that hands-on experience, it can be very meaningful for the family.
What is green burial? Well, unlike conventional burial, and that's, we call conventional burial what you see in most cemeteries. And, you know, we showed a photo of that at the beginning of the presentation, but green burial, also known as natural burial, you'll hear one term or the other. It's a way of returning bodies to the earth ecologically. So everything going into the ground is biodegradable, and the clothing, the container, and this is the way we used to bury our dead in the US before the invention of embalming, or the introduction of grave liners in the 19th century. And it's before we really handed over this whole ritual to the funeral industry. Women washed and dressed the body, men made the coffin, the family and friends waked the person, and then they would transport them to the cemetery, or, you know, the back 40, as it were. So green or natural burial is conserves natural resources, reduces carbon emissions, and really contributes to the preservation and hopefully the restoration of the habitat. The green containers are used in a green burial, so you wouldn't have a, you know, a large metal casket or hardwood casket. Some of these, I really love these images of some of the containers that we have here from, some of them are more local and some are from further away, but, you know, we have the pine box, you know, traditional pine box, everything from that to a cardboard coffin on your right here. And this is our own Ruth Foss in Arlington, Mass. From Morning Dove Studio. Really has been really a pioneer in bringing the cardboard coffin here to Massachusetts. Mary Lauren Fraser lives in Vermont. She was born in Massachusetts, but she makes these lovely wicker caskets. And then we have a simple shroud here that you can see at Larkspur in Nashville. So these wicker and sustainable material caskets, they're really excellent materials. Many times they're local. Some people, and you may have heard of this, actually they build their own coffin while they're alive. In fact, Joan Pillsbury, who's on the call here, she coordinated a workshop a couple of years ago in Gill, Massachusetts, and it was held in Greenfield, and worked with a carpenter from Maine and invited people to make their own coffins. And so at the end of that workshop, you can see everybody like taking their coffins out and attaching them to the top of their cars, and using them as a bookcase or a chest to put clothes in. So that people do that. And for the cardboard coffin here from Morning Dove, Ruth's coffins, she really talks about how they're lovely as they are, just plain like that, but it's also, people can decorate them and really make it a much more meaningful expression of love by writing notes or painting pictures or decoupaging. And so they're really, you can get more creative. And we have to say that, and you can look at our website, and we'll give you that website address at the end of the presentation for these resources. But so green burial is pretty simple, yet there are businesses that create products that are more expensive and maybe unnecessary, or like you may have heard of the burial pod, capsula mundi, or caskets that get flown in from other parts of the world, and that has a high carbon footprint on it. So these are kind of solutions to invented problems. I mean, you hear, and you've often heard somebody say, well, just put me in a pine box. I just want a plain pine box. And so that's really very conducive for green burial. Other characteristics of green burial, often the marker is a flat local stone. It could be a natural marker. In some cemeteries, there's no marker. They know where you are because they track you by a GIS or GPS system, but there might be just a little metal plate that indicates where the body is. And the opening and closing, meaning the digging the grave and then covering the grave with the dirt once the coffin is in the ground, may be done by hand in some cemeteries. Again, not all, it's cemetery by cemetery. The depth of the burial is 3 to 4 feet to bottom. And this, you often hear 6 feet under, but really at shallower, in shallower areas, it's where the aerobic bacteria is most conducive to, doing what it's supposed to do in terms of feeding, helping decomposition along. So the idea of 6 feet under is something that that is not part of what we're doing with green burial. Often the graves are mounded, and you saw that in a photograph earlier when Elizabeth was doing a comparison, and then the dirt settles down over time. And sometimes it needs to be filled in a little bit more, but basically it settles down flat, and then you can reseed it or just let it go natural. And again, every cemetery sets its own rules and regulations, and this is true about density as well. So in green cemeteries and conservation cemeteries, typically it's 300 to 400 people an acre that are buried. Versus the 800 to 1,000 in a conventional cemetery. So there's a lot less density. And we want to just say a word about public safety. So we get questions about the safety of dead bodies, and obviously hospice workers, you're you're very familiar with this, but here's what the Center for Infectious Disease has to say about the dangers of dead bodies, as well as the World Health Organization. And so, so many people who don't work in death care have this fear that, the dead body is somehow going to contaminate them, or, and it's really just an unfounded fear, and yet we have it. In the world of COVID-19 right now, we also know that, people are even more, they can be more afraid. And it's not the body that we have to worry about with COVID so much as the people who are gathering, and we all know that funerals have been, curtailed, or certainly in the earlier days of COVID, and limited, or just not having funerals at all, or memorial services opting for something later in this, the summer. I in fact know of there are a couple of services that I'm going to that were held off from people who have died this winter. So this is really, we're still learning about coronavirus and its impact on the living and dying, but I guess the important point is to just take precautions when dealing with the body. And I think everybody working in the Green Burial movement is doing the best they can to accommodate families' wishes while being cautious, of course. So, and we can talk more about that during the Q&A as well, if you have questions. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about what green burial is not, as well as what it is, by describing some aspects of conventional burial. And again, conventional burial is what we, most of us know as burial. The most significant difference is between the embalming in containers, and we talked a few minutes ago about biodegradable containers. So with embalming, it's not required. It's often used for cosmetic reasons, meaning that you would have a wake in a funeral home or a viewing, and it's often the funeral home itself, funeral directors that feel more comfortable having the body embalmed if there's going to be a viewing of 1 or 2 days. But again, it's not required by law. And it really, embalming is something where you're replacing the body fluids with a mixture of chemical preservatives. So it can be it's a very invasive procedure. Many years ago, I was a funeral director, embalmer apprentice, and I was really, it was an eye-opening experience to really see what happens with embalming and how invasive that is. So it's the individual policy of the funeral home whether you would have embalming or not. So and in terms of the vaults that you see here, so this is another very big aspect of conventional burial, and you can see all of these vaults kind of, cheek to jowl next to each other. And the idea behind having a vault, so it's really you're putting a box inside of a box in the ground. And that is to prevent the grave from collapsing. That's the reason that it was that many cemeteries give for requiring a vault. Again, it's not required by state law, but it is the cemetery itself that would require those a vault. It reduces the risk of cave-ins if you've got heavy equipment going over a lawn cemetery. And this is really something that you can in some Jewish cemeteries, because they want to be on the ground, they will have what's called a butter dish, or a vault that is 3 sides, and so but it's open on the bottom, so the coffin can go right on the dirt. So people do try to get creative. But it's really about maintaining the lawn and the flat surface. And then the metal or hardwood caskets, these are not sustainably sourced in most cases, and be oak or mahogany. It's still common, but they're oftentimes, when you have a hardwood casket, it's a hardwood, so that's a resource that is very precious, at this point. and it doesn't biodegrade as quickly. Or you can have metal caskets, and that's still pretty common, metal caskets, which have, sometimes they have varnishes and paints, and that also leaches into the earth. So these conventional caskets are designed to protect the body from the elements, but in reality, we know, what do we know? I mean, that the body is going to decompose regardless. So there are also, like, hermetically sealed caskets, and that doesn't let air flow. And really, air is what we need for the body, to decompose. And so that's an important aspect, and you don't get that with some of these, many of these conventional caskets. So I just wanted to show you the difference between conventional burial preparation and natural burial preparation. And as you can see on the left here, there's a vault, and it looks to be metal, but it could very well have been painted that color. And then there's astroturf that's hiding the hole, because again, we have this fear of death. We don't want to see the grave, so we're like covering that up. And this is in cemetery speak. This turf is they're called the greens. And then this, on top of it, is a lowering device. So the coffin goes on top of that lowering device, and then it gets cranked into the ground. And I've been to funerals where they won't even lower the casket into the ground until the family is gone, until everybody has disperses, because I don't know if they feel like it's going to be upset people or what. Versus natural burial preparation, which you can see the coffin is sitting on boards that will then be lowered by ropes, probably by the family, friends and family. You can see shovels, and so the filling in the grave will be done by the family and friends. And that, if you've ever taken part in that kind of experience, it's a very powerful experience to be able to cover the person who's in the coffin or the shroud, your loved one. And again, we don't get that in conventional burial because everything is often done for us. So so that's another reason that so many people find green burial so compelling. So I just want to cover for a minute the 3 types of green burial cemeteries as categorized by the Green Burial Council, which is a national certifying body for green cemeteries and green products. So we have a hybrid cemetery. This is Riverside Woods in Gill, Massachusetts, a natural cemetery in Pennsylvania, and then a conservation cemetery. And I just want to talk about the difference between these 3 levels. So a hybrid burial ground, and again, I talked earlier about how we're working with cities and towns to help them figure out how to incorporate green burial into their existing cemetery. So the hybrid, it would be in a conventional cemetery. A green burial might be right next to a conventional burial, but in the green burial, you don't have a vault or a grave liner, and you would use a biodegradable container. So and you can have, there are sections of cemeteries that are for green burial, or that you can just fill them in. I know at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, they just fill in green burial where they can, in between all of these conventional burial, these conventional graves that have been there for a very long time. I just wanted to just say too that the work that Green Burial Massachusetts is doing is figuring out what cemeteries allow green burial in our state. And since 2017, our volunteers have been contacting cemetery operators to find out if they offer green burial. The majority of cemeteries that do offer it would be considered hybrid. And we publish these results on our website, and they change every month because we're trying to update the information. And so there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. It's a big undertaking. But we've heard back from people who found this table extremely helpful. So this is just a screenshot, but it'll tell you whether it allows green burial, what kind of cemetery is, they'll have contact information. Sometimes we'll also have information on the cost of the burial and things like that. And more cemeteries, again, are calling us and saying, how do we do this in our cemetery? So if you want to work on a cemetery project, you can certainly contact us and let us know, because we definitely need volunteers to keep this project going. And then just to go on for those 3 categories, I just wanted to take that side detour to tell you that there are resources where you can find out if a cemetery does allow green burial. Then we've got the natural burial grounds. And again, so no vaults or grave liners, biodegradable containers. And they also adhere to strict ecological impact statement to ensure that soil isn't degraded, that they're protecting plant diversity and water quality and ecological habitat. So this is Green Springs, which is a 100-acre former farm located outside of Ithaca, and then Cedar Brook Burial Ground, which is a tree farm, 150-acre tree farm with 2 acres that are set aside for green burial. So that's the second designation. And then we have conservation burial grounds. And a conservation burial ground has all of the things that a natural burial ground has, and it operates in partnership with a nonprofit conservation organization. So that's kind of the difference there. Ramsey Creek Preserve, which is you're seeing here, was the first green cemetery that opened in the United States in 1996. So 33 acres. And so now there are over 300 green cemeteries that are certified by the Green Burial Council in the United States. So the movement is really moving ahead. And speaking of conservation burial ground, Green Burial Massachusetts is working with our partner Kestrel Land Trust to open Massachusetts' first conservation cemetery. It's a project, and those of you who are on the call who've been following our work know that it's been very, very long in coming, although we are getting closer to this finding a parcel of land. We've got a major donor, we've got a business plan, we have a great team of people who are researching a cemetery, including soil scientists and land conservationists and so on. So, you know, our hope is that we will open up a cemetery in the Pioneer Valley that would be open to anyone, and that it would be a beautiful place that would have a field and forest for a meadow burial or a forested burial. And so we're excited about that, and would love to realize that goal soon. So.
So before we transition, as we're winding down the presentation, we're going to head into resources and Q&A. A common question that comes up in a lot of our presentations is, what about cremation? How green is cremation? Is that a more environmentally friendly option? And yes and no. Cremation has become one of the most popular choices, and it's starting to bypass conventional burial. According to the Cremation Association of North America, in 2018, the cremation rate was 53%, with a predicted upward trend to 59% by 2023. And the National Funeral Directors Association forecasts that cremation rates will reach 80% by 2035. And these stats did not include COVID-19 deaths, so that rate is forecast to be much higher than this now, with COVID being included. The burial of cremated remains does take up a smaller footprint than a full body, but cremation is not particularly more environmentally friendly due to the use of fossil fuels, the release of emissions into the atmosphere, and cremated remains, unlike some products that are out there, are actually not a good source of nutrients for plants. And when I say fossil fuels, there needs to be natural gas for the retorts, or as you see the coffin going in, for 2 to 3 hours from 1600 to 1800 degrees. The release of CO2 emissions and mercury from dental fillings and the like can leak into the atmosphere. Cremated remains are mostly made out of bones, so that is a dry calcium phosphate with some minor minerals. And again, they're not recommended for plant growth. And so here's some resources for you to take with you. Again, this presentation is being recorded. You can also, if you know how to screenshot it, you can also screenshot the slide as well. So the first is Green Burial Council, which Judith mentioned earlier. The Conservation Burial Alliance are the website for our Valley Conservation Cemetery project, National Home Funeral Alliance, and then two contact information for two home funeral guides here in Massachusetts, in Loving Hands and Peaceful Passage at Home.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Yeah. And also, if you want to, you can find those resources on our website.
Yep. Which is right here. This is a way to contact us. We have our website, greenburialmass.org. You can call us by phone, leave a message, and we'll get back to you. Or you can email us. Or if you really like snail mail, you can also mail us to our inbox.
Right. And also just a reminder too, that database of the cemeteries in Massachusetts that allow green burial is also on our website. So
Correct.
You can check that out there. Right. So that's us. That's us. We wanted to, make sure that we had plenty of time for questions and answers. And so I think what I'll do is stop the share and we can, yeah, we can look at each other there. So, right. Hi, everybody. Oh, so you can see you now that, the slides are down. So what questions do you have, or what would be useful for a conversation?
We have to remember everyone's muted, so you may have to unmute yourself.
Or if you prefer, you can write your question in the chat.
Right. Okay. So Kate has a question. Raise your hand. Yeah, you can raise your hand or use the raise hand function, or yeah.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Judith. That was a good presentation, a good overview. I just want to say that my heart was touched in a big way when my sister-in-law died. My son-in-law hadn't thought at all about what was going to go on at the end. This happened in the fall. Locally here in the Greenfield area, she died. We got a wicker casket from Mary Fraser.
Nice.
We buried her up in Heath. We had a fiddle player, and it was just such a lovely homemade. We lowered her with braided ropes. It was such a different experience that came together really beautifully.
That's
So I
beautiful.
just want to advocate that
Yeah.
that it worked, and luckily I am informed about about a lot of the resources. So that was nice to be sort of the doula, the death doula in that circumstance, but appreciating what it, sort of the normal person doesn't really know how to go about it.
Yeah.
So.
And thank you for sharing that, Kate. I mean, it's so good to hear, personal stories. And I just had a question. Did you have a relationship to the town of Heath, or did you go to Heath because they allow green burial there?
Actually, my daughter and son-in-law live in Heath.
Oh, so that's perfect.
So I knew that Heath was a green burial, good spot.
Yeah.
So that worked out.
Excellent. Thank you.
I saw Stanley's hand was raised.
Yes. So, I've been following this, some as Judith would know, having lived in Montague for about 35 years, but that's not my question. My question is, I think that you'll run into a situation where some members of the family, perhaps even immediate family, will have a sort of an emotional difficulty with this. And it would appear as though there could be an involvement of some counselors of some sort who could talk to people who are reluctant. Now, we personally would not be reluctant, but there are members who could be. So you have to, I guess, be prepared for those people who would not be so ready to go along with it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And we actually have a couple of people on the call here who work with families to help them with the process. And I don't know if Joan or Heather, you want to say anything about your work with families?
Sorry, this is Heather. I'll also put my video on. Thanks. My laptop wasn't working well tonight, and so I'm on a computer stand that's like up high in my room. But anyhow, upstairs is in an awkward place, so that's why I left it off. I actually wanted to share with the gentleman that I find just the opposite. I mean, now naturally, I do work with families who want to do more of the hands-on, but I also do a lot of death education and talk to people in general. And I find that the majority of people, once they're exposed to this, there's something that really resonates with them about doing things naturally, and that they're a lot less freaked out about the ideas of green burial and natural death care than they are about conventional death care, especially embalming. For many, many people, seeing their loved one embalmed is a traumatic experience, and that they never forget, and therefore they hate funeral homes and never want to go near them again, etc. Whereas seeing a naturally dead body that is not artificially, made up, etc., it actually lets you sort of assimilate that loss a little bit better, and because it's real, and they look more like themselves instead of sort of a mannequin version of mom. And so I would say that it's not just my own personal belief, but that of many people who, once they understand what these concepts are, people really respond to the simplicity, all the things that you guys talked about tonight, the simplicity, the opportunity for family to be engaged, but also just that it's a much more natural process as opposed to something sort of space agey-ish or something when you're dealing with conventional death care, which everyone's a little intimidated by, question the necessity, don't, whatever, because it's all sort of secretive. It's behind closed doors. It's not something we get to learn and know much about. So that's my first, just off the cuff.
Okay, thank you, Heather. I was also wondering too, if Joan could say a word about Dennis.
Well, sure. Dennis died 7 years ago, and that was before green burial was a thing, especially in Western Massachusetts.
Dennis is her husband, by the way.
Dennis was my husband, yes. And since he and I had both worked with green burial for so long, we just naturally decided this is what we wanted. And so I actually cared for him at home. He never went to a funeral home or anything. And then we rented a van and took him to Maine, because he went to Cedarbrook because that was the only available option at the time. So that it was and my kids both have said, we wouldn't want to do it any other way, Mom. So I think that, as far as speaking to Stanley's point, I think that identifying the barriers or the emotions that people feel about it may allow for some education about green burial, and then you may find that there's more acceptance and buy-in to the green burial concept.
Yeah, because weren't your sons a little hesitant at first, Joan, about?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they just said, whatever, mom, so it was because I was really strong about it. But then after they participated and the whole ceremony and everything and doing all the jobs, it really made it easier for them to accept. And it was something that they were very, very happy that they did it that way.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm wondering if there are questions specific to hospice that, or if you have questions about green burial that come up that it would be helpful to talk about. Yes, Sheila.
Yes, I work in hospice. My question is just religiously. For instance, I'm Jewish, so I'm familiar with the pine box and the no embalming. But how much support do green burials have from religious leaders, as far as like rabbi, priests, that kind of thing? Have you dealt with that at all?
Yeah, I think it really depends where, the area that you're in. For example, here well, I'm in Western Mass, and in Greenfield, there's a Rabbi Andrea at the temple in Greenfield we did had a conversation with her about, really adopting green burial standards and just calling that what it is. And, she just got right on board. And yet there are, I think, other religious traditions that have a harder time with it because it's just something different to them. I know that, with some of the Catholic cemeteries, they're just, they just haven't adopted that. And having said that, there are a couple of them that actually have been certified by the Green Burial Council, Catholic cemeteries, that allow it. So I think it really, it's really, the ritual, I think, is steeped in a whole framework or context of tradition that has gone back hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And so it's really hard to introduce something new in a way, especially, around religious ceremony and things like that, because, with funerals, like tied to a church or a synagogue, or, it's, the funeral directors work really hand in hand with the clergy, right? And so they're very much together in a lot of ways. So there's just such a need for education. So yeah, I really think it depends. We're not getting a ton of, they're not, let's just say religious organizations aren't necessarily reaching out to us. I'll just say that. The Jewish community in Amherst has a green cemetery in Shutesbury, here in Western Mass. So I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that religious question at all.
The only thing I might add is that I think it with like the following two questions, it's what their congregations are interested in. So I think as more people talk about it in their churches or their temples, it becomes more advocated for, and then the clergy get on board. I think as there's a need for the education, because some people don't know it's an option, but if I could not see, I'm a celebrant, so I'm a non-denominational secular version of similar to a clergy. And there's an uptick in that profession as well as people move away from organized religion. And there's that kind of goes hand in hand sometimes with green burial, I've noticed. Anecdotally, I don't have any numbers to prove that. However, I think I could not imagine if someone wanted that any denomination would step in and say, no, you can't have that for for a religion. I have not heard of that happening. So.
Right. And also because, oftentimes the cemeteries are operated separately from the religious organization anymore. So it's really not, it's the cemetery's call rather than the synagogue's call or the church's call. I see that Stanley has his hand raised. Oh, you're muted, Stanley. I think you're still muted there. Oh,
I think Stanley never put his hand down after he spoke.
oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
I actually have a couple of questions.
Mhm.
So what happens when someone dies? So say this is what your plan is. You want to have a green burial. So say we work in a lot of, for example, nursing homes.
Mhm.
And of course we're in hospice. So we talk about end of life, we talk about dying. So I guess it's two pronged. So if someone dies in a nursing home, what we usually do is you would call the funeral. Who do you call? And then like, how does that process work if you have a green burial?
Yeah, well, it's something that you would have to, you have to really educate the families ahead of time, because because it takes a little bit of time to figure out, to make the plan to find the cemetery where you want to be buried. So if you
Mhm.
have that cemetery picked out, if the family has that cemetery picked out, I mean, you can, the family can transport the body with the proper paperwork, or they can use a funeral director to do that. But I think in terms of the actual, cemetery where they're going, they really have to know ahead of time that they do allow this. And I think that's where, we see a lot of people, they haven't done the research, and they just, the person dies and they say, well, he wanted a green burial. Well, have you researched if the cemetery you want to go to allows that? So I think that's, we really ask people to plan ahead because it's not that simple necessarily.
Are there coordinators to help families through this, or is the family responsible for doing it all?
Well, people like Heather and Joan work with families again, but it would have to be ahead of time. But that's why
Mhm.
it's good for hospice to know like who these folks are. And again, we
Right.
have resources on our website where people can call in advance and really start to have those conversations. Joan?
Interesting.
Well, I'm finding as a cemetery commissioner in my town, I'm finding that the funeral homes are, if they're not saying, oh, no, you can't do that when someone says, oh, we want a green burial, they're willing to work with the family, and they know where the green cemeteries are. And so especially from a hospital or a nursing home, the family can still use the funeral home and just not have the embalming and have it's what's called immediate burial, and that's costs a little bit less, and you don't have any of the services unless you want to do it later on. You could certainly amenable to that. So yeah, we're working with the funeral directors, as well as there's a list of folks on our website that will help families. And
Right.
I'm listed there. I haven't been called yet, but I do answer a lot of questions over the phone for the Green Barrel, Massachusetts.
Right. So there are home funeral guides who can help you.
Right.
Kate?
Okay.
There is a difference between a home funeral and a green burial. I mean, you can have a green burial and have all of the other ceremonies and use the funeral home. And you can have a funeral home do just the paperwork and the transportation, and so there's all kinds of options. It's not one stop shop.
Right.
There are
So it
at
takes
least-
a lot of
Right, I wanted-
pre-planning.
Okay.
there are 3 funeral homes in Massachusetts that are already recognized by the Green Burial Council. Then there are also ones that are more and more open to it if you discuss it ahead of time. There is planning involved, but you can go home funeral, but you can also go funeral home as well. It's not that you just specifically have to go to home funeral if you want a green burial.
So Kate and then Heather.
Right,
What
okay.
I just wanted to say is, as my sister-in-law was dying, we had sort of planned on transporting her body and putting her in the screen house up in Heath. When the time came that she actually died, it was 10 p.m. It was 10 p.m. We had had a long day. We had already made contact with a funeral home just in case. And the funeral home came and took her body. We then agreed that it would be a Friday funeral, mostly because of the weather. It was going to be a good day. And they kept her refrigerated and then transported her body to the funeral home. So they were willing to play it by ear with us,
Mhm.
and that was nice.
Yeah, thank you. Heather?
Well, what I wanted to reiterate is that that yes, in order to have green burial, you do not have to commit to a full-on home funeral. They are two separate things. They can beautifully go together, but absolutely, if you or if your loved one who dies, or if a patient on hospice has died and has expressed an interest in green burial and never said anything else about post-death care, they can have just that. And that can be accomplished by hiring a funeral home for what's called a direct burial. And so, and then also the cemetery that you choose, providing that they allow for green burial, often will have people that will help facilitate that burial as well. So it does not mean that you've got to have young strapping people in the family that can lower a coffin into the grave, and that you've got to keep them at home for 3 days ahead of time or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that clear that we are talking about two separate things.
Absolutely. But also to say that if a funeral director comes to pick up the body, I mean, you have to be really, clear about you don't want embalming, because
Right.
to be in a green cemetery, you can't be embalmed. So I think that that's one thing that is really important to make clear ahead of time, to be clear with the funeral director if you're using a funeral director. So, yeah.
And that is the reason to a good reason to know the term direct burial. So that means the funeral home isn't offering any services, so they're not going to be embalming the body. They will just be storing the body prior to taking it to the cemetery.
Yeah.
Period.
Heather, I just want to,
That's a good point.
yeah, it's direct cremation and immediate burial are the two terms that we use out here in the western part of the state.
The different price lists for funeral homes, they might call it different things. So yes, immediate or direct is
Correct.
some of the ones that funeral homes out here. You have to kind of look, all these menus are not necessarily the same from funeral home to funeral home. They have their own way of
Right.
And when you say immediate burial, then they can be, it doesn't mean like that moment. They can be stored like this person, or it goes right into the ground. What does that mean? So it can be stored and then
Yes, the body can be stored. Yeah.
It means there's no waking and no service at the funeral home or at the,
okay.
So immediate, not that they have to go in at a specific time frame, but more that there's no ceremony or services ahead of time.
Okay, and then you can have the service that you would like, where you would like it in a green area, or the place where you would like to have the green burial.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was helpful.
So I know we're bumping up against 7 o'clock here. Stanley, you had a question?
Just two things. When I checked in the local community here, because I was concerned what happens if you call 911, because then you get into a whole other system of the hospital or whatever.
Yeah.
And I found out that if you have made arrangements with a funeral home in advance, then once the medical director or whoever, a neutral person, certifies the death certificate, you do not have to call 911. You simply call the funeral home and they will then preserve it. And the final comment, is that the discussion that we had, the term they used was prepare for a graveside funeral. And we, of course, just asked for absolutely minimal things done by a funeral. Still costs a lot of money, but you still can say
Right.
graveside funeral. And the point I'm trying to make is what you do if you're at home and you don't want to call 911 because you know what would happen with that.
Yeah, yes. Point taken. Thank you. All right.
Well, thank you so much for this. This was very
I think we
awesome and educational, and I'm really, really grateful that you took the time to do this for us. So thank you.
Well, we're happy to do it. And thanks to everyone who came out tonight. And it's so good to see our friends and familiar faces, Lisa and MK. And yeah, and do check out our website, you know, if you have questions. And we also have a phone line you can call and somebody will call you back if you have questions. So yeah, thanks again for attending, and happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you.
All
I'll
right.
put this on our YouTube channel, and I'll send Judith, I'll send you a copy as well.
Great. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thanks, Jessica, for organizing it.
Of
Good night,
course,
everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.